I thought the scariest moment of our wedding was when the ring slipped off the little pillow and rolled under the front pew. And everyone laughed, and Daniel laughed too, and I decided it was a good omen, that we knew how to laugh together. I was wrong. The scariest moment came later, when I was standing in our hotel suite in my wedding dress, a glass of champagne in my hand, and he was looking at me not with love, but with that particular hollow guilt in his eyes that I didn't know how to read then, but learned to read very well afterward. "Did you seriously think my parents' wedding gifts were a down payment on an apartment for your mother?" I said, and my voice was level, almost calm, because the words felt so absurd that saying them loudly was impossible, the way you can't shout about the ground suddenly turning to liquid beneath your feet. I ran to the window and saw her, Linda, my mother-in-law, in a long eggplant-colored coat, dragging a large travel bag from a taxi toward our building. Our building, our address, our first night in our first apartment together. She was already walking through the front entrance. I had exactly as much time as it takes to ride an elevator to the 3rd floor, and in that time I did one single thing. I called my father. I suppose I should explain how we got to this point, to the 3rd floor window, to the wedding dress, to the woman with the suitcase in the courtyard below. Because 18 months before that night, everything looked completely different. I was Sarah Collins, 28 years old, a senior analyst at a consulting firm that occupied 3 floors of a glass building downtown. I rented an apartment with my friend Megan, kept a fiddle-leaf fig named Conrad, and woke up on weekdays at exactly 6:40 because I liked having 20 minutes of quiet with my coffee before the world started asking things of me. My life was neat and warm and predictable. Not in the boring sense, but in the way that good music is predictable. You know what's coming, and it's still beautiful. I met Daniel Ward in October at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was standing by the bookshelf pretending to read the spines, but he was really looking at me. I felt it before I turned around. He was tall and dark-haired, with the kind of quiet self-assurance that doesn't need any noise around it to hold itself up. We talked for 3 hours in the corner of someone else's living room, and when people started leaving, he said, "I'd like to continue this conversation somewhere with fewer people and better coffee." And I said, yes. Just yes. No games, no pretending to check my calendar. Because sometimes you can feel that a person is going to walk into your life, and you simply open the door. The first months were easy. Daniel worked as an architect at a small firm, loved old films, and could make a risotto that smelled like a memory of something good. He was attentive, a real listener, never interrupted. His mother, Linda Ward, entered my life around the 3rd month. He invited me to her birthday dinner, a small family thing, nothing formal. Linda's apartment smelled of lavender air freshener and faintly of old newspapers. Photographs of Daniel lined the walls. Preschool, graduation, a ski trip from sometime in the late 90s. Linda sat at the head of the table in a purple sweater and smiled the kind of smile that takes over a whole face, and I decided she was a pleasant woman, a little loud, perhaps a little too focused on Daniel, but warm on balance and genuine. Daniel beside her was slightly stiff, slightly quiet, but I put that down to ordinary sunnish awkwardness in the presence of both his mother and his girlfriend at the same time. "Sarah," Linda said that evening, refilling my glass, "Daniel tells me you're an analyst. That must pay quite well." "Not bad," I said, smiling. "Stability is everything," she said, and smoothed the tablecloth as though that were the most important thing she had to tell me. I didn't think anything of it. People say things like that. General, filler things, just to keep the conversation afloat. I ate her lemon tart and told her it was wonderful, and Linda beamed, and everything was fine. In the car on the way home, Daniel took my hand and said, "She liked you, I could tell." And I thought, good start. We spent another year in the mode of everything is fine, with occasional family dinners, with Linda's brief visits, which sometimes arrived unannounced but never lasted long. There were small oddities I noticed and immediately filed away under "don't make a mountain out of a molehill." For instance, once Linda asked how much the apartment Megan and I were renting cost. Just asked, offhandedly, between a discussion of the weather and a recipe for something. I answered vaguely, and she nodded as though my non-answer had satisfied her perfectly. Another time, this was already after Daniel and I had decided to move in together, she mentioned that young people need more space and asked very carefully which neighborhood we were looking at. Daniel glanced at her then, quickly, just for a fraction of a second, and something shifted inside me. Something small and quiet, but I didn't let it speak at full volume. Daniel proposed in March, in the kitchen, with a ring in a small velvet box and risotto on the stove. No grand restaurant, no audience, just the two of us and the smell of Parmesan. I said yes the same way I always did, simply and immediately, and we held each other, and it was real. I believed that completely. Daniel's parents. His father had left when Daniel was 11, and they hadn't spoken since, so from his side of the family, there was only Linda. My parents, Anna and Peter Collins, received the news with pure joy, called that same evening, came to visit 2 weeks later, and my mother held me in the doorway for a long time and said she was so happy. The 8 months of wedding planning were Linda's kingdom, not because she formally took charge, but because she appeared at every decision point. The venue? This one feels cold to me, Sarah, don't you think? The menu. I don't eat shellfish, and a few of the other guests don't either. The dress? She came to the fitting, though I had invited only my mother, and stood by the mirror and said, "Gorgeous," with an expression that could have meant anything at all except gorgeous. When I brought up my quiet concerns to Daniel, that his mother was perhaps a little present, he responded with a gentle, tired patience. "She just wants to help. This is important to her, being part of it." And then he would add, "You know how she is on her own. I'm all she has." That last phrase, "I'm all she has," was something I heard often enough that it stopped sounding like an explanation and started sounding like a key to a lock I hadn't yet found. My parents gave us $20,000 for the wedding, a significant portion of their savings. "This is for your start," my mother said, pressing the envelope into my hands. "For your life together, for a home, for whatever you need." She was crying when she said it, and my father had his arm around her shoulders, and it was the quietest, most honest moment of the entire day. Daniel thanked them warmly and sincerely, or what I read as sincerely. I tucked the envelope into my bag and thought, this is the foundation of something real. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined standing in that hotel ballroom in my white dress, watching my parents dance, was that the envelope had already been discussed, not by me, not by my parents, by Daniel and his mother, in a conversation that had taken place 6 weeks before the wedding in Linda's lavender-scented apartment over tea I was not invited to. I did not know this yet. I was still believing in the good omen of the dropped ring. The reception ended at midnight. My mother hugged me so tightly I felt the bones of her arms. My father shook Daniel's hand and then, unexpectedly, pulled him into a hug too, and Daniel looked, for just a moment, like a man who knew he didn't deserve it. I filed that look away in the same drawer as all the others. We arrived at the apartment, our apartment, the one we had moved into 3 weeks prior, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building 2 blocks from the park, at midnight. Daniel had been quiet in the car, not the comfortable quiet of a man at peace, but the compressed quiet of a man holding something inside that was pressing against his ribs. I thought he was tired. I was tired, too. The night had been long and beautiful, and I had danced in heels for 4 hours. I set my bouquet on the kitchen counter. I kicked off my shoes. I was reaching for the zipper of my dress when Daniel said, from the doorway, "Sarah, there's something I need to talk to you about." Those words, the particular flatness of them, the way he wasn't looking at me directly. "Now?" I said. "It's after midnight. We just got married 4 hours ago." "I know," he said. "I know. I'm sorry. But you'll find out anyway, and I'd rather—" He stopped, pressed his lips together, looked at the floor. "My mother, the money your parents gave us. I told her, I told her we'd help her with the apartment. The room did not spin. That's what people say. The room spun. It didn't. Everything became very, very still. The refrigerator hummed. The streetlight outside made a thin orange stripe across the floor. I heard my own breathing. "What apartment?" I said. It was not a question. It was a sentence I was building slowly, one word at a time, while I tried to understand the shape of what I was looking at. "She's been renting for years," Daniel said quickly, the words coming out practiced and rehearsed, the words of a man who had gone over this conversation in his head many times. "She's 62. She doesn't have security. I just thought, with what your parents gave us, it's $20,000, Sarah. It's a real down payment. And we're both working. We can—" "You told your mother," I said, "that the money my parents gave us, their savings, their wedding gift to us, was going to be used to buy her an apartment." "I told her we'd discuss it." "That is not discussing it. That is deciding it. Without me." He was quiet. The refrigerator kept humming. "And where," I said, very carefully, "is your mother right now?" I already knew. I had seen her from the window at my parents' house earlier that day, loading something into a taxi. I had thought it was wedding things, gifts to transport. I walked to the window and looked down at the street, and there she was, Linda, in her eggplant coat, dragging a suitcase across the courtyard below, heading for the front entrance of our building with the focused efficiency of someone who has planned this for a long time and is simply executing the plan. She was already inside. I picked up my phone. I called my father. It rang twice. "Papa," I said, and my voice was still level, still quiet, because the cold had not yet given way to heat. I was in the eye of it, in the terrible stillness at the center. "I need you to listen to me, and then I need you to call your lawyer in the morning." Part 2. My father picked up on the second ring. He always does. This is a thing about him, this readiness, this presence even at 1 a.m. on his daughter's wedding night. I could hear the slight roughness in his voice that meant he had been asleep, but it disappeared within 2 seconds, replaced by the alert, careful tone he uses when he understands that something is wrong. "Sarah, what happened?" Not a question, a statement. My father has always been better at reading me through the phone than most people are face to face. "Daniel's mother is downstairs," I said, "with a suitcase. She's moving in." A silence. A very specific kind of silence. The kind where a person is reassembling the entire picture they had of a situation. "And Daniel," my father said. "New," I said. Another silence. Then, "I'll call Thomas in the morning. Don't sign anything tonight. Don't agree to anything. I'll be there at 9. I hung up. Daniel was still standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, which was either a defensive posture or simply the posture of a man who didn't know what to do with his hands. He had loosened his tie at some point. It hung at an angle that made him look slightly undone, slightly younger, slightly less like the person I had married 4 hours ago, and more like the person he was underneath the wedding, a man who had never quite figured out how to be in 2 places at once. "My father is coming tomorrow," I said, "with his lawyer." Something moved through Daniel's face. Not surprise, more like the particular wince of a man who has been bracing for something and has now received confirmation that it is, in fact, going to happen. "Sarah, it doesn't need to be like that. She's in the elevator right now," I said, "moving into our apartment on our wedding night. Tell me what it needs to be like." He didn't answer, because there was nothing to say to that, nothing that wasn't either a lie or a confession, and Daniel had never been good at either. 3 soft knocks at the door. I looked at Daniel. He looked at me. The knock came again, patient, unhurried, the knock of someone who fully expects the door to open. I opened it. Linda stood in the hallway with a large rolling suitcase, a tote bag on each shoulder, and the expression of someone arriving at a place they have been mentally living in for some time. She had changed from her wedding outfit into dark slacks and a cream blouse, and her hair was freshly pinned, which meant she had taken the time to fix herself up before coming here, which meant this was not an impulse. Her perfume preceded her, something floral and slightly too heavy, the kind that lingers in upholstery. "Darling," she said, and opened her arms toward me. I did not step forward. She lowered her arms, read my face. Something shifted in hers, a recalibration, quick and invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 2 years watching her recalibrate. "I know it's late," she said pleasantly, as though she were apologizing for arriving at a dinner party after dessert. "The taxi took forever. Is there a place I can put these?" "Linda," I said, "what are you doing here?" "Well," she glanced at Daniel, who was examining the floor. Daniel said, "I'd like to hear it from you," I said. "What are you doing here at 1 a.m. on our wedding night with a suitcase?" She smiled. It was her reassuring smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes, the one that was slightly too wide and slightly too fixed to be real, a painted thing, precise and deliberate. "Sarah, I know this feels sudden, and I understand. It's your first night as a married couple. That's sacred, of course it is. But we discussed this." "We," I said. "You and Daniel discussed this." "We're family," she said. The words came easily, smoothly, the way words do when they've been rehearsed. "I thought it would be easier if I just made the transition tonight, while all the moving energy was still happening." She gave a small, almost girlish laugh. "I won't be any trouble. You won't even know I'm here." "There is no room for you here," I said. The smile didn't move. "The second bedroom is not for you." A silence. Linda looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the floor. The hallway smelled of her perfume and the faint trace of old suitcase. That particular smell of travel and displacement and things that have been packed and unpacked too many times. "Daniel," Linda said. Her voice had changed, still soft, but with a thread of steel running through it now, thin but unmistakable. "You told me we had an agreement." "Mom," he said it in the half-swallowed way of a man who wants to begin a sentence and immediately regrets starting it. "Maybe tonight isn't—" "What agreement?" I said. I turned to him. "What agreement, Daniel?" He didn't look up. "What agreement?" I said again, and this time the words were quiet in a way that was worse than shouting. I could feel it, the temperature dropping out of my voice, leaving only the shape of the question, clean and cold and waiting. "I told her she could stay," he said, "for a while we sorted out the apartment situation." "The apartment situation," I repeated. "You mean the apartment situation where my parents' wedding gift was apparently already allocated to buy her an apartment." Linda made a soft sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sigh, something in between, the sound of someone performing mild, wounded surprise. "Sarah, I'm not talking to you right now," I said. She stopped. In the 2 years I had known Linda Ward, I had never spoken to her like that. I had been careful, patient, diplomatic. I had smiled at the wrong comments. I had bitten down on a dozen responses. I had given ground so gradually and so consistently that at some point, I could not tell you exactly when, the ground I was standing on had become very small. I was standing on it now. And something in me, some tectonic thing deep and slow and long overdue, had decided that this was as far as the line moved. "Daniel," I said, "tell your mother to go back to her apartment. Tonight. And then you and I are going to sit down and you're going to tell me everything. The whole thing. From the beginning." He looked up then. He looked at me the way people look at things that are happening faster than they calculated, with a kind of surprised helplessness, as though he had set something in motion a long time ago and it had only now arrived. "She doesn't have an apartment," he said. "That's the thing. She gave up her lease last week." The refrigerator was still humming. Somewhere outside, a car passed. I stood in my wedding dress in the doorway of my apartment and let those words find their full shape in my mind. She gave up her lease last week. "When," I said, "did she give up her lease?" 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks before the wedding, which meant this had been planned, not as a desperate, impulsive solution to a housing problem, but as a deliberate sequence of events with a fixed endpoint. She had surrendered her apartment before the wedding, so that by the wedding night, there would be nowhere else for her to go. The gift from my parents was already in the plan. $20,000 earmarked, already spent in a spreadsheet somewhere in Linda's careful, patient mind. I looked at Linda. She was watching me with that still, measured expression. Not quite defiant, not quite contrite, somewhere precisely in between, occupying the exact position of a woman who believes she has already won and is simply waiting for the other party to understand it. "How long?" I said. "How long has this been planned?" Linda tilted her head slightly, the way you do when you're deciding how much truth is strategic. "I have been trying to find stability for a long time," she said gently. "Daniel knows what I've been through. He understands what it means to have family you can count on. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable, Sarah. I'm asking to be included. I'm asking to be part of this family." "You are part of this family," I said. "You are Daniel's mother, and you are welcome at our table for dinner, and welcome to call, and welcome to visit. But you are not moving into our apartment. And the money my parents gave us is not buying you anything. Not a down payment, not furniture, not a lease deposit, not $1 of it." A silence so complete I could hear the elevator moving in the shaft down the hallway. Then Linda's chin dropped slightly. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes, and here it was, the shift I had seen coming, went soft and wet. Not grief, performance. The tears of a woman who has deployed this particular weapon before and found it effective. "After everything I've done," she said softly, "to see my son settled, happy, I gave up so much. Linda," my voice was flat, "it's 1 a.m. I'm not doing this tonight." I looked at Daniel. His face was the color of chalk. "I'm calling a hotel," I said. "You will pay for it. And tomorrow morning, my father is coming here with a lawyer, and you and I are going to have a very clear conversation about what the money is for, what this marriage is, and what the rules are going forward." I picked up my phone from the counter. "You have about 30 seconds to tell me if there is anything else I don't know, because finding things out later is going to be much worse than finding them out now." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, and then, and this was the moment everything fell from a manageable catastrophe into something else entirely, he said, very quietly, "There's a document. My mother had a lawyer draw it up. She asked me to have you sign it. It's in the folder on the desk." I turned. There was a manila folder on the corner of the desk that I had assumed, when we moved in, contained apartment paperwork. I walked to it, opened it. The document was 4 pages, printed in clean, legal font, and at the top it said, "Agreement of Financial Contribution and Cohabitation Terms." My name was already on it, not as a signature, as a named party. Sarah Elizabeth Collins Ward, my new legal name, which I had only acquired today, which meant this document had been prepared before the wedding, with the assumption that I would take his name, which I had told Daniel I planned to do exactly once in a private conversation 3 months ago. My hands were not shaking. That would come later. Right now, I was in that particular zone of shock where everything becomes preternaturally clear. The grain of the paper, the slight glossiness of the printed letters, the smell of fresh toner. I read the first page, then the second. The document outlined, in legal language that was careful and precise, an arrangement by which 20% of our combined household income would be directed monthly into an account designated for Linda's living expenses, and in which my parents' wedding gift of $20,000 would serve as initial capital for securing appropriate long-term housing for Linda Ward. There was a line at the bottom of the last page for my signature. There was also, on the third page, in a section about asset protection in the event of marital dissolution, a clause I had to read twice. It stated that in the event of divorce, Daniel would retain primary claim over any jointly acquired real estate on the grounds of his prior financial contribution to the household, a contribution calculated, in the document, to include costs that had in fact been paid entirely by me during the first 8 months of our living together, when Daniel had been transitioning between jobs. My rent payments, my utilities, my grocery runs. Reframed in clean legal language as a joint contribution. His contribution. Someone had been very, very careful with this document. Someone had thought about it for a long time. I set the folder down. I walked to the window. Below, a light rain had started, the fine, indistinct kind that doesn't feel like weather, just like the air having second thoughts. Linda was still standing in the hallway. I could hear her speaking to Daniel in a low voice, the particular cadence of a woman explaining something urgent and important to a man who was running out of road. I thought, I need to know who wrote this. I thought, I need to know how long this has been in the making. I thought, I need to know if the man I married this afternoon knew, when he was saying his vows, that this folder was sitting on that desk. I turned around. "Daniel," I said, "did you read this document?" "Yes," he said. "Did you agree to it?" A pause that was its own kind of answer. I thought, if we just talked about it. She just wants security, Sarah. She's not trying to. "Did you agree to it?" "I didn't sign anything. That is not what I asked." He looked at me. In the dim light of our apartment, on our wedding night, in the particular quiet that follows a detonation, my husband looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, and recognized, with a cold and absolute clarity, as shame. "Yes," he said, "I agreed to it." Part 3. I did not sleep that night. I don't think Daniel did either, though at some point he moved to the couch and I didn't stop him. Linda went to a hotel. I found her one, mid-range, 2 miles away, and Daniel paid for it without argument, which was the only thing he did that night that felt remotely like a correct decision. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside went from black to the deep gray blue of very early morning, and I drank 3 cups of coffee and read the document 3 more times and made notes in the margins with a red pen I found in the drawer where we kept batteries and takeout menus and all the small miscellaneous objects of a shared life that had, 12 hours ago, seemed permanent. The document had been prepared by a lawyer named R. Hawthorne, whose name and address were printed on the letterhead. I wrote the name down. I wrote down every clause that referenced my assets, my income, my name. I photographed every page with my phone. I sent the photographs to my email and to a cloud drive, and then, because I was not taking chances, I texted them to Megan, who would understand without me having to explain. My father arrived at 9:02, which for him is essentially early. He is a man who believes that punctuality is a form of respect, and he was wearing his good coat, the charcoal one, which he puts on when something matters. He had Thomas Reed with him. Thomas had been his lawyer for 20 years, a quiet, precise man with reading glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who has dealt with worse. My father hugged me at the door and then looked at my face, and then looked at Daniel, who was standing by the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, and said nothing. He didn't need to. My father has a way of communicating entire paragraphs through silence. We sat at the table. I gave Thomas the document. He read it without expression, which I had learned over the years meant that he was reading something significant. My father sat with his hands folded on the table. Daniel sat across from him and looked somewhere between the window and the middle distance. "Who prepared this?" Thomas said when he had finished. "R. Hawthorne," I said, "the letterhead." "Robert Hawthorne," Thomas said, with a slight nod that told me he knew the name. "He does a lot of estate planning, family arrangements." He looked up at Daniel. "Did you instruct him to prepare this?" "My mother did," Daniel said. "Did you review it before today?" "Yes." "Did you instruct her to have it prepared?" A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone was walking a dog, and the dog's nails clicked against the pavement in a quick, cheerful rhythm, completely at odds with the atmosphere of the room. "She came to me with it," Daniel said, "about 2 months ago. I told her it was too much. She said it was just to have something in writing, just so everyone was clear. I thought," he stopped. "I thought if I didn't push back, she'd let it go." She didn't let it go, my father said. His voice was quiet and even and contained absolutely no warmth. No, Daniel said. She didn't. Thomas set the document down and removed his glasses and polished them in that way he has, slowly and methodically, which means he is organizing his thoughts. This document is not enforceable as written, he said. Several clauses would not survive a legal challenge. The income diversion arrangement lacks proper consent of both parties. The asset claim clause is built on a misrepresentation of financial contribution. He put his glasses back on. However, the issue is not the legal enforceability of this specific document. The issue is the intent it represents and the steps that were taken to put it in front of you. She gave up her apartment, I said, 3 weeks ago, before the wedding. She planned to move in last night. My father made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, low and controlled, the sound of a man exercising considerable restraint. Here is what I recommend, Thomas said. First, written confirmation that this document is null and void, signed by Linda Ward and witnessed. Second, a clear legal agreement outlining what financial assistance, if any, you choose to provide to Daniel's mother, defined, limited, and signed by all parties. Third, he looked at me, your parents' gift. Is it in a joint account? Not yet, I said. It was given to us in cash. It's in an envelope in my bag. Thomas almost smiled. It was the particular near smile of a man who has, in 30 years of practice, seen worse, but is nevertheless mildly relieved. Keep it separate for now, he said, your own account, until everything is resolved. Daniel was staring at the table. I want to ask you something, my father said to Daniel. Not loudly, in the tone he uses when the conversation has moved past the point of performance and into the place where only the real things matter. Did you know when you married my daughter yesterday that your mother had given up her apartment and intended to move in with you? A silence. Yes, Daniel said. My father looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at me. There was something in his face, not anger or not only anger, but grief, the particular grief of a parent who has done everything right and cannot protect their child from everything anyway. I'm sorry, Daniel said, and I could tell he meant it, and I could also tell that meaning it was nowhere near enough. We met with Linda that afternoon in a coffee shop 3 blocks from our apartment. Neutral territory, Thomas's suggestion. She arrived 8 minutes late, which was itself a statement, and sat down across from me in her good coat and looked at Thomas's notepad and made a sound that was approximately the noise of a woman who has encountered an obstacle she did not anticipate. I don't understand why we need lawyers, she said, looking at Daniel. This is a family conversation. It became a legal conversation, Thomas said pleasantly, when you had a legal document prepared. Linda looked at me. Sarah, I want you to know that everything I've done has been out of love for my son. I only ever wanted... Linda, I said, I want to be clear about something because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding going forward. I opened the folder on the table and took out the 3 pages I had marked. I know about the document. I know about the timeline, the lease, the apartment plan, the allocation of my parents' money. I know that this was planned at minimum 2 months before our wedding. I know that Daniel was aware of it. I set the pages down. I'm not here to argue about your intentions. I'm here to draw a line. She looked at Daniel again. This time, he didn't look back. Something shifted in her face, very slightly, almost imperceptibly, and for a brief moment, I saw through the performance to the calculation underneath, the rapid recalculation of a woman who has realized that the landscape has changed. I've been alone for a long time, she said, and now the softness in her voice was different, not quite the performed softness of the doorway last night, but something rawer underneath it, something that was, possibly, the original wound that the calculation had grown up around. Daniel is all I have. When he married you, I thought I would lose him. I looked at her, at the tightness around her eyes that wasn't age but something older, something that had been there long before me. And I felt, unexpectedly, a thin thread of something that wasn't sympathy exactly, but was adjacent to it, the recognition that a person can do genuinely terrible things from genuinely real pain, and that understanding the pain does not obligate you to absorb the damage. "You're not losing Daniel," I said, "but you are losing the plan. The financial arrangement is off the table, the document is voided, and you are not living with us." I paused. "What I am willing to do, what Daniel and I can discuss once we've gotten through the rest of this, is help you find a stable rental situation within a reasonable budget. Not out of my parents' money, not as a contractual obligation, as a choice if we make it. But that conversation happens on our terms, in our time, and it begins with you signing the document Thomas has prepared." She looked at the sheet Thomas slid across the table. She looked at it for a long time. "And if I don't," she said. "Then we proceed differently," Thomas said pleasantly. She signed. She signed it with the pen Daniel held out to her, which I thought, watching, was either a detail he hadn't thought about or a detail he had. A small gesture of complicity, a small closing of the gap between them, a son offering his mother a pen because there was nothing else he could offer her now. I noticed it. I didn't say anything. There would be time for that conversation later, the conversation about Daniel, about what he had allowed, about the months of knowing and the choosing not to tell me, about standing in the church and saying his vows with a manila folder sitting on the desk of our apartment. That conversation was waiting in the apartment for us when Thomas and my father and Linda all went their separate ways, and we went home, and Daniel closed the door, and we stood in the kitchen in the afternoon light. "I need you to tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning, when it started, what you agreed to, what you knew." He told me. It took a long time. It had started 8 months before the wedding. Linda had approached him with the idea, framed at first as just a thought, just a possibility. "If Sarah's parents give you money, you could help me, just a little. I'd be so grateful." It had been gradual, incremental, the way erosion works. She had not asked for everything at once, but for one small concession, and then another, and each small concession had become the baseline for the next request. The document had been her final move, an attempt to make the informal formal, to lock in what had been negotiated in the soft, deniable space of family conversation. Daniel had not instructed the lawyer. He had not paid for it, but he had known about it, and he had not told me. And in his silence, in the 8 months of knowing and not telling, he had become something more than a bystander. "I kept thinking she'd stop," he said. "I kept thinking if I just held things off, it wouldn't go this far." "But it did go this far," I said. "Yes. And you said vows to me yesterday while knowing this was in the apartment." He looked at me. His eyes were very tired, very honest in the way eyes get when there's nothing left to protect. "Yes," he said. I stood at the window for a while. The park was visible from where I stood, a slant of green through the buildings, the tops of trees beginning to go gray with autumn. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, drinking her coffee in the morning quiet with her neat, predictable life. I thought about the envelope in my bag, which my parents had pressed into my hands with a love that was so uncomplicated, so entire, that it made everything that had happened in the last 18 hours feel like a particularly bad translation of a word that had no equivalent. "I'm not leaving," I said finally, "but I'm not pretending this didn't happen. We're going to need help, real help, a counselor, someone who can help us figure out if we can build something honest from this." I turned around. "And your mother is not in our life on her terms anymore. She's in our life on ours. If she accepts that, genuinely, then we can find a way forward. If she doesn't," I paused. "Then you have a choice to make, and I think you know which way I need you to choose." Daniel nodded. He looked broken and sorry, and, underneath both of those things, relieved, in the particular way of someone who has been carrying something they should never have agreed to carry and has finally been allowed to put it down. It took time. That's the part that doesn't fit neatly into a single conversation, the part that doesn't resolve in an afternoon. There were months of counseling, honest, difficult sessions where the three of us, and sometimes just the two of us, sat with a calm and relentless therapist named Dr. Okafor and said things that were true and uncomfortable and necessary. Daniel came to understand, slowly, what his silence had cost, not just me, but him, and what it meant to have allowed his mother to treat his marriage as a resource to be managed rather than a relationship to be respected. Linda signed a financial boundaries agreement that Thomas drew up, and the apartment situation was resolved through a housing assistance program that my father researched and my mother found, characteristically, before anyone else. My parents' money stayed in my account for 4 months while everything was sorted. Then Daniel and I used half of it to pay off a debt that had been quietly eating at us, and we put the other half into a savings account that had only our 2 names on it and nobody else's. A year after the wedding night, I was sitting on the small balcony we had built out of a terrace that had previously been used for storing bicycles and old paint cans. It was an October evening, the kind that smells of cold air and leaves and something baking from one of the apartments below. I had a cup of tea. The park was visible from up here, more of it than from the kitchen window, a wide green expanse going gold at the edges. Conrad the ficus was inside on the windowsill, larger now than when I'd brought him from Megan's apartment, reaching toward the glass. Daniel came out and sat down beside me, and we didn't say anything for a while, which was a different kind of silence than any of the silences from that other night. Not the silence of things held back, but the silence of things understood. "She called today," he said, meaning Linda. "I know," I said. "She called me too." He looked at me. "And?" "I told her she was welcome for Sunday dinner," I said, "if she could come as a guest and not a landlord." He almost smiled. "What did she say?" "She said she'd bring her lemon tart." We sat with that for a moment. The sky was going the particular deep blue of early autumn evenings, and somewhere below us the dog from the first floor was clicking its nails against the pavement, quick and cheerful, the same rhythm as a year ago, unchanged. I thought about trust, how it doesn't come back the way it left, not in the same shape, not through the same door. It comes back slower and stranger and more deliberate, if it comes back at all. It's built with smaller materials the second time. An honest conversation on a Tuesday, a phone call taken instead of let go to voicemail, a difficult thing said plainly instead of buried. It doesn't look like the original. It looks like something you chose, with full knowledge of the cost, because you decided the person across from you was worth the architecture. I had lost something on my wedding night. I knew that. I had lost the particular innocence of believing that love, by itself, is enough, that the right person automatically means the right circumstances, the right choices, the right family. I had lost the version of my marriage where no one had ever put a document on my desk, where no one had looked at my parents' love and seen a financial instrument. I had lost that clean, uncomplicated start. But I had learned something that I would carry for the rest of my life. I had learned exactly what I would and would not accept. I had learned the sound of my own voice when it said no. Quiet, cold, and absolute. I had learned that loving someone does not mean absorbing everything they bring into the room. And I had learned that the most powerful thing you can do in a moment when someone is trying to take something from you is to stay completely still and know exactly what you are worth. The tea was warm in my hands. The leaves were gold in the park. Daniel's shoulder was against mine, familiar now in the way that things are familiar when you have chosen them repeatedly, in full daylight with no illusions left to protect. I thought, this is mine. The apartment, the evening, the ficus and the tea and the difficult year, and the thing we are slowly building out of what survived it. Nobody is taking it.